There's my website, by the way. Note that. I have a lot of information I keep putting out there. Okay, next. Okay, now I'm going to introduce you to the man here, Dr. Dan Burisch, previously known as Dr. Dan Crane. He had his name legally changed in Las Vegas, Nevada. I have the court record on that. He showed an aptitude for microbiology when he was a young boy. He got his first microscope when he was only 5 years old, and his first telescope a couple of years later. When he was only 8 years old, he was taken under the wing of the director of pathology for a major hospital in California. He was born here in California, Southern California, and I recently found out he had a reunion meeting with this doctor in Las Vegas recently. And he's very precocious. He's a brilliant man. He was taught the art and science of histology, medical microbiology very early on. So let's go to the next one. Dan was recruited in 1986, according to his story, and he is putting it down in detail in a video debrief right now. I'm going to just pause for a moment to tell you that what I'm telling you has become extremely controversial, just like the Bob Lazar case. But to an extreme degree, there's a lot of polarization. There are certain individuals on the internet who have called Dan directly a fraud and a lot of dirty names, okay, which he doesn't deserve. Others who idolize him, okay, that's not me either. All I did was, and I was alerted to the document that was leaked called the Q94 document. It was the most technical document I had ever seen. It had a lot of biological, microbiological terms in it. I first saw it in 1999, negotiated with the lady who sent me a copy, who was going by the name of B.J. Wolf at the time. That was just a pen name that she had on a book called Eagles Disobey, and it was about Inca City on Mars. And it was ghost-written for Dan and two of his compatriots. And so she had to learn more and more about Dan. She said as she did, she found out that he worked up at the Site 4 facility, Area 51. He was in black operations. And found out more and more about him, which story was not the complete truth. But it was enough to hook me, and in April 2002, she asked me for some help, and because her original intention was, we're going to spring Dan. And I'm going, oh yeah, right. What we'll do is we'll pick him up in a car, we'll transfer him to another car, we'll drive him down to Hollywood, and I'll put him on a TV station just like that. Boy, was I dreaming. I don't know what I was dreaming that night. Anyways, that wasn't about to happen. Before I left for Las Vegas to meet with Marcy, she called me at work on a Friday in the late afternoon before I left, and she said, how would you like to meet Dan when you come here? And I said, can you arrange that? And she said, yes. And so I went over there in April 2002, walked into our meeting place, which was in a library, and I first saw Dan sitting at a table. He had a briefcase open. He had papers spread all over the table. I was dressed casually, but I have a lot of hats, and I had one of these baseball caps that said U.S. Air Force on it, because I was in the Air Force. He saw this. He just grabbed all this paper, stuffed it into the briefcase that he had, shut the briefcase, grabbed it, and ran for the elevator. I said, whoa. I said, what's going on, Marcy? She says, I'll handle it. I'll be back in a minute. She went try to explain things to him. About 5 minutes later, came back into the room, beckoned to me, and he shook my hands, and the first time he was shaking. He says, "You understand I have to be careful." And I said, "Can we talk?" And he says, "Let's go to a private room." We got a private room. My first talk with him lasted about an hour, and I asked him questions. And during that time, he answered one question in such a strange way for a man who was a scientist that I about fell out of my chair, because only somebody who had some contact with an alien would know this. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, the aliens are numerologists." I went, "Yeah, I know that. How do you know that?" Right? And we got into a study of the special numbers that they like the number 9, which is a key number. This is why they renew their treaty every 9 years. 2003 was supposed to be the last treaty signing. They said, delay it 1 year till 2004. Why did they do this? Because of something he again told me during that first meeting called what drives the whole program, the reason for the cover-up, which doesn't have to do with the fact we have ETs in our skies, is because of the doctrine of the convergent timeline paradox. And I said, "Oh, what? What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you see, the treaties were renewed every 9 years all the way up to the year 2012. Oh, 2012, boy, that rings a bell. Yeah, he said, "Well, we've been there before. That's when the catastrophe happens. And we're trying to sidestep around the catastrophe. You can't tell the people that. Where's this alien from? He's us from the future, 52,000 years from now." Huh? Time-traveling aliens that are us? Why is he in this gray form? He says after the catastrophe, a period of time, the human genome split. And one became the J-Rods and the other became tall, blonde Nordics. So that it was like you take the left brain and split it from the right brain, right? And the qualities of one went one way and the qualities of the other went another way. And I say, "Oh, I see. Nobody will believe it." Here's Dan at an earlier time standing outside the little alien. He was approached by agents that said they worked for the Department of Naval Intelligence. Don't look it up. Doesn't exist. There's an Office of Naval Intelligence, not a department. Bob Lazar had one of his tax forms, and there was a Department of Naval Intelligence on there. That was one little piece of evidence that journalist George Knapp had that Bob Lazar worked out at S4. When I talked to Dan's mother and father, John and Dodie Crane, John Crane said, "I used to help out Dan with his taxes because Dan's not real savvy with finances. And he's brilliant with science, with biology, with chemistry, but not with finances." And he said that was the same thing on his form that he got from the government. His W-2 wage form said Department of Naval Intelligence. Okay, next. Here's just one thing inviting Dan to join the New York Academy of Sciences. He said that he got his PhD from State University, New York. There's a possibility that the New York Academy of Sciences gets new PhD candidates, lists, and sends them an invitation. We can get no confirmation that there was ever a student by the name of Dan Crane, Dan Burisch, or any combination thereof at State University of New York. We do have a notarized statement by a man who worked with Dan, who said he was going to go into a business on the side with Dan, called State University of New York in 1995, and they confirmed at that time his PhD. We have another notarized statement from his mother that said she got it in one of these cylinders that you get in the mail. So he had that document, and then it was handed over to his wife, who promptly put it away in a vault and made it inaccessible. Okay, next. But we do know that Dan graduated from the University of Nevada at Las Vegas, and here he is working in a chem lab. He wanted to be a medical doctor at the time because his grandfather died of cancer. He wanted to find a cure for cancer. He was excellent in the field of biochemistry. He refused to falsify some test results that one of the professors was experimenting with. I believe it was Laetrile on mice. At that time, it was a popular way to treat cancer. And he refused to endorse the test results. And the professor said, I can blackball you at the school. And he went home, and his father brought him back, and he enrolled in psychology just to finish up his degree. But he does have all the credits requisite for biology, and he even has a graduation ring that says BS in biology. Okay, next. Dan didn't always work up at S4. They only had him working up there a couple of years. I think from 1992 through early 1995. And then he lived in town. He was only called up every now and then for in an advisory role, or they would say, get out your microscope, we want you to look at this, different things like that. So he had taken a regular job as a parole officer with the sheriff's department, later on in security. They were required to have jobs like this. Well, for one thing, Majestic doesn't give him a paycheck. They will provide for his needs, but no paycheck, nothing traceable anymore, right? Especially since Lazar opened up his mouth. So, you know, his wife worked, he worked, and he wanted to follow up on something he had learned directly from direct communication with the J-Rod, which was to drill down into ancient bedrock up here on Frenchman Mountain, which is on the east side of Las Vegas, coincidentally near where John Lear lives. And there he picked up a sample of something down in the bedrock that he looked under a microscope, and this is when he discovered this amazing particle he calls the Ganesh particle. We do not know what it is. He believes it's some kind of, well, I believe it's a micro form of what we call ball lightning or plasma. But this thing carries a program, and it seems to emerge when a crystal is electrically stimulated with a certain voltage, seems to emerge out of what he calls a portal. Now, what does it do? Well, he discovered if you put a cell, a denuded cell or a damaged cell, near this Ganesh particle, it generates what in biology they call a cross bridge. And the cross bridge connects with the cell and regenerates it. Dan has gone way beyond that to the point of where he now thinks on any planet where you have silicon dioxide, which means you may have oxygen in the atmosphere, silicon dioxide in the soil, where it can form crystals, you may get these Ganesh particles, and it may be these Ganesh particles that generated the first monocells, prokaryotic cells, our ancient Archean cells, and maybe even further on, eukaryotic multi-celled creatures. But, and I agree with him here, because the more and more I studied molecular biology myself, I had to go to class at UCLA to try to keep up with some of this terminology. I also came to the conclusion, being that I am a information technologist and have worked with computers and worked with codes, that DNA is a code, and that code contains an instruction set. And it seems like out of all the DNA in the human genome, 93% of it seems to be inactive. But now they know it's not what they used to call junk DNA, but that this DNA also plays a role in producing what DNA produces, which is polypeptides, amino acids, and chains of molecules that become proteins, which become the structure of our functioning bodies. It's all as if it were designed by a magnificent intelligence. Of course, myself, I have gone to the point, because of some of my own personal experiences, of reaching the conclusion that the entire universe is expressing a substrata of itself which is encoded. All of its laws, all of its rules, everything from subatomic level on up is generated by code. Okay, next. These are the diagrams done professionally. According to Bob Lazar, the first level, Papoose, it's actually Papoose Mountain, not Papoose Lake. Papoose Lake's on the other side of Papoose Mountain. It's just a dry lake. Carved into the base of the mountain is a lab containing 9 hangars with 9 separate discs. Like he said, we don't know how we acquired these, whether they crashed, whether they were given in exchange, whether we shot one down. But he worked on one particular model he called the sports model, because it was like a jazzy sports car. Okay, next. Now, this drawing was done according to Dan's description of underground level 4, where they installed later on biological labs, and a special level 5, where an elevator bypassed level 4 and went down at a slanting angle to get down to level 5, in which there was a special, he said, environmental chamber, in which the J-Rod, who was suffering from a peripheral neuropathy because of some kind of degeneration in his system, was housed in a special environmental unit. And there was a suite, which he called the ambassadorial suite, and you'll hear and see Dan talking about that soon if I hurry up. Okay, next. This is a drawing that Dan did of the degenerated J-Rod from reticulum 4. Okay, next. Here's just a star diagram of zeta reticuli, 1 and 2. Next. Here's a picture of Dan spending his time looking through microscopes. Next. Here's a photomicrograph showing a Ganesh particle emerge through a portal. Okay, next. Here's just a scheme he has called Hyperspace to Earth, a notion of how the lotus works. He calls the whole thing lotus. And he believes it comes from a divine source. Okay, next. More micrographs of the Ganesh particles. I brought up the term biophotons. He asked me to do some research on biophotons because I'm more familiar with physics. And I did so, submitted a couple of papers on this. He made those papers part of his project papers and delivered them to Washington, D.C. And I went, what did I just do? Okay, next. Dan is now retired as of March 2005. In emeritus status with respect to Majestic 12. So as you could see, when I first met him, he was still operational, serving as science director of Project Lotus. Okay, next. And here's the book that I wrote, soon to be coming out. They're working on the galley proof right now. I understand this process will still take another 3 weeks. So I may not have copies of this until next month. Okay, that's the end of the slides. Okay, the first question, Dan, they want to know is, where did you work in the mid-90s and how did you come to be employed there?
Well, several locations in the mid-90s. I had some cover positions here in Las Vegas, which made me look like a good old-fashioned Joe. In fact, I had had some police experience at the late 80s. You're probably centering your question around the work for the government. In 1986, I was approached while working as an undergraduate student in Dr. Bert Bell Barbero's office in his parasitology laboratory, to be exact. I was looking through a scope at the time. 3 gentlemen walked into the laboratory, closed the door behind them. There was 2 uniforms and a suit that were present. Both of the uniforms I would make as most probably being United States Navy. My memory of that one event's kind of hazy after seeing all of the suits and uniforms and whatnot. We spoke for a while. They asked me if I was interested in seeing the world and the like. I told them I in fact was. We went through several interview processes, not unlike this, and reviewed my background. I went through several background investigations. Finally, starting up 90-91 time frame, I was cleared for working past groom to the Papoose Mountain facility, that place that doesn't exist, about 90 miles north of here, the nowhere place. That's how I came to work there. My original assignment was at the Groom Lake facility to review histopathology slides. And I went through nearly a year's testing and then was basically let loose for a year, and I heard no contact from them. After that, I was brought back in and shown some higher grade slides of unknown origin. Following that, I was introduced into a working group and subsequently brought into the Papoose facility, the Site 4 facility. We worked for well over a year on slides of unknown origin. After I took a minimum leadership position under several of the other biologists who are already present, most of which are now deceased. You know the names of those individuals. I was then introduced into the level 4-5 facility, and the 4-5 coded for 9. You're aware.
Yeah.
Covered this in ancient history. And so what we did is introduce the new members, myself amongst them, into the clean sphere area, and we were eventually shown the subject for which we were examining the slides. The slides were unusual in that they were in pressurized cells, and they were reviewed by us on a conveyor with a completely automatic microscope. We weren't touching anything. We give verbal commands. At the second instance, we were finally allowed to have a VRML-like keyboard for examining the slides, and I digressed, but then working with the JROD itself in the ambassadorial suite or the CleanSphere suite.
Now, was this under this Project Aquarius?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Initially, I was assigned as a working member of Project Aquarius. Then finally, I was made an assistant working group leader. And then mysteriously, after one meeting with the JROD, I was asked to take the working group leader position. I didn't find out why I was asked to take the working group leader position until, well, within this last year. I never understood it because Stephen was older than I. He was my senior not only in ability but in age, and I would have never figured being advanced above an individual like that in ranking within a working group. And in fact, I never considered myself above him. We worked together. The Q94 document that you have in your possession was co-authored. My name went on there as the primary investigator because I was the working group leader. But in fact, he and I were both involved in the authoring of that document.
Oh, okay. Now, could you explain briefly what you were briefed on who and or what JROD was?
Initially, I was briefed that JROD was an alien, specifically from the reticulum system, to reticulum 4.
Okay.
I had no idea the truth. Yes, from 2 reticulum 4 now, but I had no idea the truth of how they came to be. As I said to you before, I have never met an alien, but I have met an extraterrestrial. Mm-hmm. I found out subsequent to interactions with the JROD. And again, they have personal names. The term JROD simply means 15, which was a basing name for where they're located, the number of light years from our location. So they took those names, and they identified through the Sigma protocols, the linguistic protocols, with a rod symbol, which was an inertia symbol, and the letter J. And in fact, that was a combination of Mayan and Egyptian numerology having to do with a rod and a J, meaning 10 and 5 for 15.
Okay. Now, 15 light years away, is that the Cleese 876?
876 Charlie, from
Charlie?
what I've been told.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, he did not specifically tell me that that was the location, but the number 15 was mentioned.
Well, how
They don't
did
call it, apparently, Cleese 876, whatever.
how did J-Rod get here? I mean, how did he, 15 light years away? That's
He crashed in '63, from what I understand,
oh, is that right?
outside of Kingman,
Okay,
Arizona.
right.
There was a problem involving his physiology and his biophysiological communication with the craft went wrong. And of course, he's ill, as we know, with the MGUS and the paraprotein associated problems. And he crashed.
And how was he? Was he transported immediately from that crash site to the S4 facility and housed?
That I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know.
You don't know how he came to be at the facility in the first place?
I believe he and associates were transferred separately. Mm-hmm. He to the originally to the Groom Lake facility.
Okay.
And an associate to, I believe, Los Alamos.
Los Alamos.
I have no independent verification of where the associate went, though. All I can say is that he was there at Site 4, right?
Now, you interacted with J-Rod. Was there a general procedure for this interaction?
Well, there was not a general
Protocol?
procedure. There was a very specific procedure.
Very specific, okay.
After we would be brought in with our helper biologists, there was controlling helper biologists, those in the gallery, and then the introduction specialist, which was myself on a number of occasions. We entered the CleanSphere through a large series of protocols involving pressurization and compartmentalization, no pun intended, until finally we were pressurized in fully encapsulated a TEC, a TES, total encapsulated suit for entrance into the clean sphere. Once we were pressurized and entered into the clean sphere, well, I should digress. We had a medical evaluation and all of that first. But they ceased doing that after a couple of medical evaluations. It was more just interested, let's get you in and get the work done. I would enter into the clean sphere, and I was not supposed to communicate with the J-Rod at all. I was not supposed to know his name. The reality is we were communicating from the time that I entered into the ambassadorial suite external to the clean sphere, talking back and forth freely. I could hear whatever he was projecting at me from thought, and he could very clearly hear what I was thinking. I say hear, meaning perceive. I was supposed to stand over by a hologram projection system, which was run as like a teleprompter system over to my right, that would be run inside of the clean sphere glass. Hold my hand up and mimic certain signs, and it became a joke. It really did. It became a joke. Those folks who were watching from the gallery running the show thought that I was standing there and mimicking the signs, and this was the only communication underway. They perceived on the day that the approach, the close approach that he made, the grabbing incident that he did with me, they perceived that there was a communication that occurred. So I began getting questioned quite extensively whether or not he in fact was communicating with me, because he had promised not to, apparently, with the Sigma unit. I alluded to the fact that there was conversation underway, but I didn't talk about what it was until, of course, I was caught in my research protocol forwarding ideas that were somewhat different than what they expected, where they expected my private research was going to go, and this is much later. And at that time, the deal was brokered to find out about the doctrine for the convergent timeline paradox. I told them a little bit about what he showed me, a little bit, and they told me a little bit about the DCTP.
Now that you brought that up, which implies travel through time as well as space, and you said that J-Rod was retrieved from a crash near Kingman. Was he at that time just traveling through space from the staging area, or do you know? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
He wasn't doing any time traveling at that point?
No, not as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Not as far as he told me, no.
Can you describe J-Rod to us, what he looked like and how he behaved?
Yes.
Okay.
The gentleman with which I was associated was approximately 3.5 feet tall. He had a dark brown appearance, very ruddy appearance to his skin. He was in a highly pressurized clean sphere. He exuded glycoprotein-like material through pores on his skin, which was associated with the neuritis, the neuropathy that we were dealing with.
Did this have an odor to it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I couldn't perceive any odors whatsoever. I was inside mine. But I would imagine, but I have no data set to say what it would have smelled like. And in fact, there was nothing I read that indicated whether or not there was an odor. Why? I'm wondering. You've asked that before. That's why I'm wondering.
Well, yeah, I've heard about this secretion coming through the pores of the skin before, and there have been those who've had encounters who say they could smell an odor.
Okay.
From the skin.
All right. Where were we?
You were describing him?
3.5 feet, large head in comparison to torso. So the ratio of the cranial to the torso area would be larger than in what we would call a modern human being. Large, bulbous black eyes. The whites of the eyes had been selected out. So it looked like large people, basically. when you look into his eyes, you feel like you're going to fall into his eyes forever. And I think that probably had something to do with the telepathic nature of his mental structure. Large arms, large length. 4 very thin, sinuous fingers. Nails, not as long as presented in some of the images that you've showed me in the past. The ones done by Tom Mack, was it?
Bill Uhouse.
Oh, yeah, that's it, the Puppet Master photos. I'm smiling because the Puppet Master leads me to other nicknames.
Right.
But he was hunched over most of the time, could not support himself fully, given muscular atrophy. And that had to do with the peripheral neuropathy which he was suffering. So he would grunt and move toward me almost in a flopping fashion. Feet were large in comparison to what we would say our feet would be.
How many toes?
He was unclothed 4.
4.
And he was unclothed, which bothered him. He wanted to wear clothing and was refused in every turn. Called himself captive, and justifiably so. His feet were unusual in that his plantar area had a very large knob underneath what we would call our heel. His facial features were grotesque in comparison to what he showed me what normal would be. He was
normal of his type.
Yes. Yes. He was bilaterally symmetrical to the extent that the disease process was not changing his facial features. Nose was recessed, not a nose like we have, but basically two operculum, 2 orifices. An extremely small mouth, a hard palate, no teeth. His musculature, again, it was suffering from the problem at the myoneural junction due to the neuropathy.
Do you have any idea what his chronological age was?
622.
622 years. Okay. What is the normal lifespan?
That I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know. That number 622 is now used as an important number within the community.
Okay.
A reference, a request from 622 or a report from 622 could be from anybody. So it's used, and in fact the SRP report that I have with me today, the supplemental report for 0302 that I have, probably is labeled from reviewer 622. I haven't it's going to be a cold reading when we look at it, but it's probably from 622.
Okay.
They excrete in a manner that we would excrete. Their external genitalia are different than ours. The females have somewhat like vulva, but they have a clasper situation. The male has a male clasper, the female claspers, and if it looks like a disc with rectangular solids that are rotated into position for clasping at the inguinal region. They do have internal fertilization.
Now this was something you read because you didn't see a female, did you?
No, this is something he showed me of his wife.
Oh. Internally.
Yes.
And how was that image presented to you? Did it appear...
I was inside the image.
You were inside the image?
That's what it felt like.
Like virtual reality? Or?
Yes. Everything that he showed me when this was the incident. When he projected it into me, it felt like I was there. My sensations were heightened. Quite extraordinary.
Was there a background perceived? Was she in a domicile of some sort?
Again, excuse the pun, a gray surrounding, very, very dull, drab surrounding, almost like a concrete evacuation center. Where you'd have evacuation zones underneath the hotels in case of mass casualties or mass disaster, where it was a very clinical environment.
Huh. So were you impressed that he was kind of depressed about his situation?
He was extremely depressed. If we were to term him human, I'm not a psychologist, but I think he would be termed as clinically depressed.
Okay.
He wept, but he didn't weep outside. He wept when he was with me.
Well, could you estimate what his level of intellect was?
Smarter than me. He was smarter than me by a long range.
Did he have a wide range of knowledge?
The mathematics that he showed me blew my mind.
Oh, is that right?
He showed me concurrently not only the equations for the rule of nines, but he also did so diagrammatically, and he did so with three-dimensional, like a VRML system, where I was watching cubes come together. So that if I was not understanding the script, I would understand it as a child learns group theory in mathematics. Highly evolved, highly intellectual, highly repressed emotionally. When I was with him, I felt great happiness to be with him, but I could feel his great sadness, not only because of what he wanted to become, what he knew he was by being present with us, but where he was and how he was being treated. He was not part of the group that has to be catered to involving the T9 treaty that was just signed. He wanted to help. He was willing. When I went in, for God's sakes, I took well over, nearly 300 individualized aspiration samples from his neurological system. He would hold his arm out for me to take them. There was no pain medication. And whenever I would fire the introduction system to remove the sample, it was an aspirative avulsion system, he would cry, and then he would just stand there and look at me.
There was a suction, wasn't there?
Yes. Yeah, in fact, I would bring the sample after the initial removal from his tissues into the introduction system, and then approve it and move it from there to one of the helper biologists. Usually it was Robert, outside of the clean sphere, and then he would move it from there to be handled under our normal protocols. It was a level 5 past our the BNBL system. He'd just stand there and take it.
So, do you feel the communication that he established with you when you were in contact with him, could he extend this communication over any distance?
60 feet.
60 feet.
Definitely 60 feet.
Okay.
So 60 feet from the center of the clean sphere to the introduction ramp going down into the ambassadorial suite. So at least 60 feet.
So you don't feel like he's been in communication with you since that time?
No.
Okay.
Was it selective in some way? Was it willfully selective on his part who he wanted to communicate?
Yes. Yes. The folks that I'm sorry. The folks that wanted to find out what he was saying to me, they knew darn well that he was communicating with me after a while, because I was smiling. I couldn't help it, because we were actually joking back and forth. And, you know, they didn't know. They didn't have any clue. They didn't have any clue what he was saying. So it had to have been selective. They certainly wouldn't have pressed me like they did after I woke up from the big attention scenario. I woke up outside of the clean sphere. I was drug out of there by Stephen. He finally got a secondary suit on and drugged me out of the clean sphere. No, they had no clue. They had no clue what he was saying. I'm sure of it. They were extra rough in removing my plug and my catheter and all of that business after I got out of the TES.
Now, one of the things that I want to ask you now, departing slightly from this subject, we're going to ask this last question, then we're going to take a break, okay? And then we'll see where we go from there. But
I'm smiling because I'm envisioning the lack of the lights.
yeah, okay. But everybody's been
I don't like this
asking me
at all.
why, and of course you're going to have to restate this again. Why are you talking to us now? What is your intention in telling us about this, about your involvement?
It's multifocal.
Okay.
It's multifocal. There's several reasons. The largest reason is not the most important reason. The largest reason from a personal perspective is to step out from under the Black Ops community
Okay.
and retire. I'm ready. I told you before, I can see myself walking along a pond and not being bothered by anybody except for maybe a bird here or there and taking a sample and just taking my time and looking at it for fun, for enjoyment.
And you're worried about your health, right? And about,
Well, my health is degrading. There's no doubt about that. The heart disease that I have is in fact degrading my health. Time is coming. I don't know how long that is, and of course that's within God's providence.
so you would like to maybe have some freedom, to have some time
Yes.
of your own,
Yes.
to go to Walden's Pond or something, right? And study the life.
Disappear at Walden's Pond.
Right.
There are other reasons too.
Okay.
You know, without yelling the poor me scenario.
All right.
Yes, people have a right to know. I mean, that's, you know, other folks have screamed that. Some of them, I think, real. Some of them phony as a $3 bill. Yes, they have a right to know what is going on. They have a right to know because this is their future. Or maybe not. And it depends upon our wisdom or lack thereof. This gets me thinking. The one thing that we've heard from the Brookings Institution study, the famous clamp study, was this would cause a great social upheaval. It would destroy our social bonds, our religious bonds. And in fact, I know I'm digressing, but I ramble. Every time an individual is approached with the issue of would this destroy your faith, I have heard, this is my experience only, I'm sure there are going to be varied opinions, no, it would strengthen it. It would strengthen it. From a certain perspective, yes. From another perspective, no. The Brookings Institution was correct on a certain level. Suspend disbelief for a moment and walk with the idea that this is real. That the ruins that are present on the moon and on Mars, the ancient temples, were in fact, and are in fact, the gifts of our own progeny. Can you imagine what is going to happen when those temples, which were prayed to as the gods, are found out to be nothing more than the creations of men, that the men themselves were those who were being worshipped, will fall headlong into the pool of Narcissus. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we'll find truth, love, God, in something other than buildings and stones and marble. Maybe we'll find out who he really is, or she, it, or just us.
And each one of you needs to decide for yourself whether he is speaking the truth. I cannot decide that for you. I'm just here like an attorney in court. My father was an attorney, presenting a case to the jury saying, this is, there's a good case for this man being who he is. And there is supporting evidence for this. There are a lot of things still that do not make sense. There are gaps, there are discrepancies. I admit this to you. But I feel fundamentally at the core of this man's story, he is telling the truth. But only time will tell, and like he said, it is our future that matters here. And I want to thank you very much for listening tonight.